But what they do read is my pitch book. Yep. That's my business plan, and that is the biggest impactor above and beyond any other conversation we may have is the pitch book. This is what I'm looking for. This is how I do it, and this is the experience that I've had in the past doing it, and that blows some doors off having that with me.
Hi, this is Craig Haskell with the Value Hound Academy. You are listening to another exclusive interview with a leading authority in the syndication of value-add real estate. Push, you are in for a real treat. We're going to be speaking with Value Hound Seth Wilson on his new #1 best-selling book called The Real Estate Flight Plan, a combat pilot guide to navigating real estate success. And in this book, Seth shares with you how his intimate experience as a U.S. Air Force combat pilot has helped him grow his syndication business to the point where he can successfully run his business full-time with the help of his staff. And you know what? You're actually going to get the inside scoop on how he actually learned some of these lessons in his syndication business. He's going to actually take you down in the trenches so you can learn the details of his syndication business. You're going to see how his syndication business really works, which will help outline some of the problems that you might want to avoid or some of the mistakes that he made that you can also avoid. So in this interview with Seth, you're going to learn how he overcame deal fatigue to buy a deal for $1.5 million that sold 2 years later for $3 million. How you can use his drink from the hose strategy to help your deals. Why his pitch book is his biggest asset to accessing deals and also dollars. Why the details of his deal matter. How you can use the Centerline strategy to stay on course. How planning and checklists have helped him avoid a lot of problems. How you can use his cheer flying strategy. Doesn't that sound fun? Why he believes in focusing on one targeted investment strategy is so dang important. The 5 lessons he learned that will help you avoid unexpected surprises. If you're a new syndicator wanting to start your syndication business, then you must listen to this high-value interview with Seth Wilson. He shares many, many little-known tips that will help you stay on the right flight path. All right, Seth, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I just look back over your career, and I can just think you've come such a long way from living in a fifth wheel for 18 months. And you're a combat pilot that got into real estate investing. So I'd like you, if you can, share with us your experience as a pilot as it relates to your real estate investment business.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, of course, you and Nikki. I've been working with you guys for a few years, and I really appreciate all the support you guys have given me especially in that transitional time frame. But we can talk about that a little later. But yeah, as a pilot in the real estate side, it's very much the same. Being a pilot is very analytical. It's very following the book. It's very, this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3. But every now and then, you have to throw the book out the window because of the external forces, just chaos ensues, and you have to be able to have a head about you to figure out what it is that you're going to do next and how you're going to safely complete the mission. And to me, real estate is very much the same. There's a checklist that, step 1, step 2, this is the book, this is how it's done. And then at some point, though, everything goes out the window, and you have to have a good head on your shoulders and come up with decisive actions going forward so that you can, once again, safely, in this case maybe not physically safely, but keeping the money safe, and then moving forward to complete your investment objective. So I think that the 2 of those right there is probably the best balance between the 2.
All right, great, thanks. And because of that experience you had from, your combat pilot experience, your military experience, and you've had real estate, you decided to write a book. And you wrote a book called The Real Estate Flight Plan. Kind of give us an idea of how this book rolls out, right? What are some of the things that you might want to tell other people about what they might learn from your experiences?
Yeah, so Real Estate Flight Plan The full title is Real Estate Flight Plan: A Combat Pilot's Guide to Navigating Real Estate Success. And what I found was that I noticed there was a lot of challenges and obstacles in my real estate business that would keep me awake at night, especially when I was making these transitions from going from smaller 12-unit properties to properties that were much larger. I realized there was lots of challenges between the two. And I would lay awake at night trying to figure out how to come up with this solution. And I would have all these complex plans. And, well, if this happens perfectly and this happens perfectly, it'll work out just fine. But then I found out that they were very easily solved, or at least more easily solved, by these one-line phrases that I had in my military career that might not make sense to non-military folks, like fight for centerline, stay in position, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Some of that stuff might not make sense to anybody, but then when you put it in context of the real estate, I figured that this is pretty good stories that I have going on here, and it's really neat to see the link between the two. So I started a blog on my webpage, and that blog eventually turned into the book as it is today, and I have since taken the blog down. So that is pretty much the link is what the whole concept of the book is.
Well, that's great. And at some point you had to figure out, okay, why did you want to write the book? Right? There had to be some reason, some why you wanted to do that. And you wrote it for somebody. Who's that somebody?
Well, actually, you were a large part of getting me to write the book, whether you know it or not. You yourself have done a lot of writing with white papers. Mm-hmm. And I was always impressed by that. I was always like, wow, he's willing to share all this knowledge for free. Just give it to anybody that wants it. And I was impressed by that. So that's when I started my blog to kind of put the two together so that people could come and take a look at it for whatever it was worth. And I think only my mom was reading the blog at the time. But eventually that turned into, I got serious about writing the book and went out to discover how to overcome the challenge of actually writing a book myself. So the book it's really intended for two people, and they both want to look over the other side of the fence to see how it operates. It's for the business professionals that want to see how the combat pilot mindset can be applied to their firm. And it's really also for the veterans that think that they don't have anything to offer in the civilian world, which is very common. And this shows them that they absolutely do have something to share, to give, and that their experiences are priceless. And it just kind of shows them how some of my stories, which may not even make sense to other veterans, how they can take their stories that may not make sense to me and be very successful for this, successful going forward with that experience.
Right.
It's not an ABCs of real estate book. There's already been plenty written on that. I don't think I have anything unique to contribute. It's really just about how an Air Force pilot made good in real estate.
I don't know. I think it's kind of cool to be a Air Force combat pilot. I do think it is a little bit scary. So maybe you can tell us about what it's like to be that pilot. What are some of the ups and downs, and what's that mindset that separates you and makes you different?
Well, yeah, there are obviously lots of ups and downs in the aviation business, but we're constantly training. I flew twice this week to train flying at night on night vision goggles in a low-level environment in formation, so low-level being about 500 feet off the ground. But we're constantly training, constantly training. And I fly the C-130, which is affectionately known as the Herc, or the Hercules. And it's not a modern aircraft really by any means. It requires a lot of being on top of it and understanding what it's trying to tell you. There's not a computer that pops up and tells you the errors that most people are used to these days. But it's a cargo plane, and it's designed to deliver cargo and people anywhere within a tactical environment primarily. And that means landing on small unpaved strips, or dropping people or cargo out the back of the airplane using parachutes. And it's definitely a different way of thinking. How's that? It's not something that most people may ever experience, and for better or for worse. And the camaraderie and the subculture is something that is very important and valuable to me.
Well, I know you were out in Afghanistan, and you were flying over there. Is it kind of scary to be up there doing that in those environments?
Well, the short answer is initially yes. Eventually, it does become a little routine. But then when you see how good that we have it compared to everybody else, you realize that ultimately we're mostly in a safer area than some of these guys on the ground that are out there day in and day out doing the patrols. Because we can just leave. We just literally leave the area if things get a little nasty. But those guys don't have a chance to do that. So, yeah, I mean, it can be nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I've seen some of the movies, and I just go, wow, I could never do something like that, and you're out there doing it. So thank you for your service, man. Really appreciate it. I just got to ask you, because you're really kind of taking your military experience and you're applying it into your business and your personal life as well. I wonder if you could share a couple core principles that you got from the military that you really believe in and part of who you are.
Yeah. So in the book, I wrote to this, and it's in the epilogue. And the reason it's in the epilogue is because the editor who helped me make the book readable, she said, we should pull out this whole section completely. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit into the book. But ultimately, it's why I wrote it. And it's about integrity, service, and excellence. And in the Air Force, our core values are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all that we do. And it kind of sounds a little hokey sometimes, but I insisted that it stay in the book. So the thing is number one is integrity. And I wrote about a story that I had where I did not have, honestly, the utmost of integrity, and it could have changed my life in a very significant way. But eventually I admitted fault and learned my lesson when I was back in college and moved on. But that stayed with me forever. So that's why I decided that this really needed to stay in the book. I met with an investor a couple of weeks ago, very successful guy, and he was telling me about all the times where his partners did not have integrity. They were talking about doing some very shady, actually, things that are felonies. And he said, you know what, I don't want to have any part of this. And now while a lot of people think, well, I'm not going to commit a felony, but then they start pencil whipping reports. They start saying, well, actually that unit's not vacant. There's somebody in there to make the rent roll look better. We've had this kind of occupancy for at least 90 days so they can get that agency loan. That's the kind of stuff that it is, you can get away with it. People do get away with it all the time. It's just it's not anything I want to have any part of. So that was the integrity side, and that's really the foundation. And then the service and then the excellence, that goes on top of it. That's kind of the icing on the cake. But having the integrity and being an honest person and not only being honest with others, but being honest with yourself. Because sometimes you can sit here at a computer and you're doing underwriting on a property you're going to purchase, and you start to lie to yourself. You say, well, yeah, we can get those rents up that high, or yeah, we can cut expenses by this much. And can you really? Really? You can do that? Yeah. And you start to lie to yourself, which is absolutely the worst. So those three core values from the military are absolutely the most important in what I have both personally in my home life and also professionally in the real estate business.
Okay, well, good. And I did read that in there, and I thought that was, and having known you, that is totally you. So I definitely wanted you to share that with our listeners, because it's a big part of not only being a good person, but it's a big part of being a good business person and having integrity, especially when you go out there trying to raise money, because these investors trust you. That's how they're investing in you, not the property. And if they have that trust, they're going to invest in you. And with your integrity, it just shows. It shines. It shows who you are as a person. So great job. All right, so let's talk about some of your strategies. You could talk about the fire hose effect. You talk about drinking from the fire hose. You talk about the fire hose effect a lot throughout the book. I wonder if you could explain that.
It's exactly what it sounds like. Trying to take a drink from a fire hose. The firefighters are putting on a fire. Try to take a drink from that. Well, that's the amount of information you need to learn to be an Air Force pilot. Day one, I have a picture in the book. they give you, no joke, about 2.5 to 3 feet tall of documents. That's what you take home with you day one, and they say, okay, you need to know all this tomorrow. And they're not joking. Because
Crazy.
the thing is, it is, yeah, absolutely. Because on day one, they expect you to be able to know everything about the airplane, everything about the airspace, everything about the procedures, everything what happens if there's an emergency. If this happens, do this. If that happens, do that. And they're expecting you to know that on day one. And they expect you to know that on day one because there's a lot of other people flying around the pattern in pilot training, and they all know it, or at least they're supposed to. And they all know it, and everybody has to go use that same piece of communal knowledge to essentially not hurt themselves or others, which is much more worse. But so you have to take the drink from the fire hose. The thing is that obviously you cannot be expected to read 3 feet worth of documents in a day before your first flight. So you really have to understand what's the most important piece from those documents and from the information you need to learn going forward. So tomorrow morning, what is the single most important thing? Okay, I'm going to go learn that. Now, what's the second most important thing? I'm going to learn that. And this has to be done every single day until by the end of the 6 months of the first half of pilot training, you know every single thing in those documents. You've been tested on them. You've had check rides on them, and you've flown those flights, possibly 100 times, and you know that backwards and forwards. So that's the fire hose effect in the military. And now the fire hose effect everywhere else is also a very real thing. So when I was learning to raise money from others, when I was learning to kind of walk the walk and talk the talk, as it were, I realized that I had a lot of information that I needed to learn in a very short period of time. And if I didn't, then none of this would work. None of the syndication piece would work. None of this raising money would work, and I'd be stuck at the same level that I was at. So I, once again, laying in bed, I was like, how am I going to learn all this stuff? How am I going to talk the talk? Because there is a lot of slang and lingo, as you know, and I needed to learn all that, and I needed to learn how to implement all that stuff almost immediately. So that's the fire hose effect. I do speak about it a lot because even to this day, I live it. I mean, a few weeks ago, I had to redo some large financial issues that we were having. I was like, okay, well, I got to learn how to do this. And I sat down with an accountant for almost 3 hours to learn everything there was to learn about it. But it exists, and it's going to exist forever.
That's right. I agree with you. And, I'm thinking about that. You're a big list guy. You like to put together checklists, and I'm the same way. So you talk about it in the book. I wonder if you can share some of the content from the book.
Sure. So we call them checklists in the Air Force, and those are just literally checklists. They're lists that tell us step by step what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. The simple reason is, and once again I wrote about this on the B-17, is that they crashed it back in the before the Air Force bought it to start bombing Nazi-occupied Europe, and they crashed the airplane, and they kept having all these issues with the airplane. And it wasn't the airplane that was too complicated or too big. It was that the people that were flying it couldn't remember every single step. They would get distracted on something else. They'd skip a step. They'd do it out of order. They'd have their own technique in doing something, and they'd crash the plane, and people died, unfortunately. So that was the first institution of the checklist. What I do in my business is I make a checklist for everything that I do more than once. So there's some things that I don't do more than once, and I won't write a checklist for that. But if I'm doing, say, due diligence, absolutely a checklist. And there's only one reason why I make these checklists and follow them religiously, and that's because there's just too many moving parts. We have a property under contract right now, and had I not gotten the loss runs for the last 5 years, and I say, actually, I need to get that now from you, well, that puts me way behind the power curve because the quotes to get the insurance sometimes take a few weeks. So had I, and then we moved so much further down the line, then we find out that, we can't get insurance on the property because of XYZ, and now my money's gone hard, and, now I'm out a significant amount of money. So having the checklist really just keeps everything in order and in flow, and I make them all the time, almost to an annoying amount of detail. And then if something changes or something doesn't work in a checklist, they just change it. It's no big deal.
Okay, great. I just want to explain loss runs. A lot of people probably don't know what that is, but why don't you explain to us what the loss run reports are?
That's part of the fire hose there, Craig.
Yep, it is.
It's something I never knew about when I really got started, but the insurance loss runs, generally you get them back for 5 years, and those are required for an insurance quote. And it just shows what kind of claims have been made on the property with the insurance that's on the property now. So sometimes it's not such a big deal, hail damage and it's been fixed. Sometimes it's a slip and fall that the owner conveniently forgot to tell you about, but it's coming, there could be a negative outcome on that. And you didn't know about it, but as soon as you inherit the property, you certainly will.
Great stuff, man. So details. I want to talk about details. You pay attention to details. You're a checklist guy. You pay attention to details. In fact, you believe the devils are in the details. So you talk about it in your book. I wonder if you could share that.
Well, I think the devil is the detail. Details are tough because especially when you're expanding and trying to grow bigger, you think big picture a lot. Us entrepreneurs, myself included, are very guilty of this. We think bigger, 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 and sometimes we don't think about how all the little things, much like a mosaic, matter. A piece here or there missing is not such a big deal, but it depends which piece it is. In the book, I wrote about downspouts and the details on that and how it affects the foundations and things along those lines. And I don't want to get way into the weeds, but effectively, it's cost people that I bought properties from hundreds of thousands of dollars because they did not have downspout extensions on their properties, which I know is not a big deal in Phoenix, but in Kansas City it is. And it's called foundation issues. And guess what? There's only 3 people that are going to pay for this foundation problem or any other structural issue. It's either going to be the seller, it's going to be me, or it's going to be the guy that the seller sells it to because I'm not paying for it. So the seller has to go back and say, that's a material issue that needs to get fixed. And I explain that I'm not going to pay for that. So all because of downspout extensions. And there's a much more detailed story in the book. And not only that, but even the screws that go into the downspouts, they can't be too long and they have to be stainless steel. They'll rust if they're not stainless steel, and if they're too long, they'll essentially just act as a trap. So anything that's any leaves or squirrel carcasses that might be coming down the downspout, it gets trapped there. Mm-hmm. And it's going to back up, and then the water could back up all the way up to the gutter level, and which puts more weight on the gutters, which could pull those off. That's a small detail that's very important.
Yeah, a lot of details. Another thing you talk a lot about in the book is the Centerline. You talk about fight for the Centerline. You talk about Centerline discipline. I thought this was pretty cool. So, and it sounds fun. So let's talk about it.
Okay. Well, the Centerline is on the runway. It's a large white dashed line that bisects the runway, much like a dashed line would be on a long desert highway. And it's the Centerline. The idea is to straddle the main landing gear and then put the nose gear right on top of it so that you have the maximum amount of distance on either side of the runway in case something bad happens. One of the things that I was taught when I was way back when I was learning to fly is that you have to have Centerline discipline. And one of the things is when you're coming into approach to land, the wind can push you around. You might not be on Centerline, you're not flying as well as you'd like to be, but generally it's kind of a wind thing. And you have to constantly fight the wind. And it's a constant input, and then you stop and you wait to see what happened to the input, and then you have to put another input in to increase what you're doing or maybe to decrease, take some of that out, and it's just constant, back and forth. It requires a whole lot of concentration. It requires a whole lot of completely understanding what it is that you're doing. And when I talk about fighting for Centerline, is that in the airplane, that's what that means. But now when you're flying your real estate company, what you need to worry about is, let's say you have a property under contract, you put it under contract, you're following your checklist, and then you start to kind of wonder. Or maybe you're expecting a report, and they say, okay, well, I'm going to have that report to you on Thursday. And let me tell you, Thursday turns to Friday pretty quick. And Friday turns to next Tuesday. And then it turns into, oh, how come we never got that done? And that kind of discipline to constantly stay on top of it and being the guy or girl that calls every day, that emails every day, that follows up every day, constantly making small and large corrections to get to the closing, to get to the close of escrow is very important. And I found that to be true. There's sometimes that I, in the past, would say, everything's fine. They know what they're doing. They're a professional. The bank is working on the appraisal. They said it's going to take, 2 weeks to get the appraisal back. Well, that doesn't mean call them in 2 weeks to see where the appraisal is. Okay, what day is the appraisal coming out? When's he coming out? Who is he? Sometimes they won't tell you that stuff, but how do we open up the units for this guy? How do we do all these things? And it's constantly staying on top of it. It also kind of goes back to the details, but people just don't do it. They don't follow up, and I think that's poor service for yourself and for your investors and everybody else involved, and that's part of the service before sales thing. So fighting for Centerline, making those small corrections, and being on top of it all the time is very important.
Good stuff. I really believe in that, and that's a big issue, that everybody says they're going to do stuff, but they end up blowing it off because they got something else going on. Someone's got to have their foot up somebody's butt to make sure stuff gets done.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm that guy. I'm the bad
guy.
But guess what? I'm also the guy that's getting things done.
Yeah,
so.
Take ownership. All right, well, let's talk about deal fatigue, right? You talk about it on page 80, and I got to say, for new syndicators, getting the first deal done is pretty tough. And you went through that deal fatigue on one of your first big properties that you did. I'd like you to share with our listeners the experience you went through, how you felt, and how you got through
it. Sure. So deal fatigue is exactly what it sounds like. You have a deal, you're trying to take a deal down, and things just maybe aren't going the way you want. Maybe they're not going as fast as you want. But what you really need to do is just stay with it. And I don't know if it's kind of like a lion taking down a wildebeest in the desert. I don't know. You just have to stay with it and keep fighting, whichever side of the fence you're on there. And with the property I'm talking about is that I just had one bad experience after another trying to get this property purchased. This was about 2 years ago, and I could not get a lender interested in the property to save myself. I was really stepping out of my comfort zone, and I think they could either see through that, or I don't know what the issue was. But the thing was that I would work with a lender for a week or two and answer their 100 questions, and they say, actually, this isn't for us. Or we'd get a term sheet and we go all the way through, and they say, well, committee said no, and it was just one thing after another. And all I wanted to do is I had an ample amount of excuses. I had more excuses than I could count to get out of the deal and save face and get my money back in the process. I could say, well, the financing contingency is not up. I'm going to get out and get my money back. In the end, it was actually one of Nikki's ideas, who works with you there. Yep. She said, why don't you ask the seller if they'll carry? That's not going to work, Nikki. And sure enough, it did. And she ended up carrying more than $1 million. The seller carried more than $1 million. And then I ended up paying her back within about 7 months. I had it refinanced. But anyway, the thing was that I just wanted to quit. I was like, I have enough quitting in me today, and I'm just going to do that. I tried. I did my best. But this is bigger than I've ever done. It's about 3 or 4 times larger property than I've ever done. I'm just going to, no one's going to fault me for that. And that's deal fatigue, and that's how you just stay at it, stay relentless, and just keep going.
Well, it's been 2 years. How's it doing? You got it under contract, you got it closed, and you started turning the property around. What's the update after 2 years?
Oh, yeah. So that property was 44 units. I bought it for about $1.5 million, which to some of your listeners will say that's crazy, but you got to be a good value hound and find those deals. We raised the rents $150 a month or more, and right now we have it listed for about $3 million. So
way to go.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It'll be a Merry Christmas when this thing sells. And
Merry Christmas. That's
yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
And the investors involved are real excited because I told them that I was going to double their money in 4 years, but now I'm going to do it in 2 years. So they just want to give me their money back. Well, I don't want my money back. You just take it and put it in another property.
Yeah.
So okay, I'll do that for you.
Well,
so yeah, that was that deal. That was that deal, and that led, of course, to bigger and better things as well.
Yep. Always getting that first deal done, the big one, it opens up so much more opportunities, and you just grinded right through it, and you got it done. So nice job. Also, you talk about in the book, which I think is kind of cute, chair flying. So I think about chair flying, I think about cartoons or something like that. I wonder if you can tell us what that is and why it's a basis of your book.
Chair flying is in the Air Force and in any aviation.
Yep.
Is when you're new to an airplane. There's all sorts of buttons and switches and techniques and procedures that all have to be followed. I told you following the checklist. Step 1 is this. Step 2 is that. And each airplane, regardless of how similar they may look on the outside, they're all different on the inside. So my airplane is not anything like the 737 you may fly cross country in. So every single time you get to a new airplane, you have to learn where all the buttons and all the switches and how to operate them and what order to operate them in. And one of the most cost-effective ways to do this is to sit down in front of a poster or in some sort of cockpit mock-up and sit there and just push the button and say, this is what I would do in this situation, this is what I do in this situation, as you follow the checklist and go through it. The reason that we do this is, like I said, it's very cost-effective. It's almost, it's free to sit in the corner of a room pushing buttons on a poster, as opposed to flying an airplane, which could cost many thousands of dollars an hour. So that's chair fly. That's what it means. Now, how I relate that to the Air Force, or how I relate that to real estate, is that every single time I do a deal, while they are becoming easier and easier because of my checklist, systems, and experience, I still think, okay, what if we have this scenario? What am I going to do? Okay, what if this scenario comes up? What am I going to do? And these may be experiences that I've had before, or these may be complete fantasies that I'm making up and that may never, ever come true. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes time to actually fly the plane, when it comes time to get on the phone with the seller, and I need to speak about something that's maybe a heavy issue, I already know what I'm going to say. I've already, if he says this, I'm going to say that. If he says this, I'm going to do that. Same thing in the airplane as it is on the ground. It's just it's far more profitable on the ground. And so that's what chair flying is. It's really a visualization and coming up with the plan before the event even happens.
Before you get in and fly.
Absolutely, yeah. Last thing you want to be is on the phone or face-to-face in a meeting and just shooting from the hip. And you definitely don't want your pilot doing that either.
All right. Well, I know you're a planner. I'm a planner, and I know it's been important to your success. You talk about it a little bit in the book, so why don't you share that with us and why planning is so important to you?
Yeah, so the most important part of any flight is mission planning. And even though what we do in the Air Force is we spend many hours mission planning. We may even mission plan longer than the length of the flight is long. So, for example, when we do training flights here, we mission plan for 3 hours before we fly for 2.5. So what that means is we understand everything that's going on in the environment, whether it be the weather, other aircraft. We also understand everything that's going on in our aircraft. Maybe the crew dynamic is different. Maybe we're going to try to do a different tactic. We come up with all these different plans going forward, and that's the plan that we're going to execute. And we write it down on paper, essentially, and everybody gets a copy of it, and that's the plan that we go from. So everybody's singing from the same sheet of music. And in real estate, it's the same way. If I don't come up with a very good plan going forward and initially it was just me doing these things because I didn't have anyone else to help me because I couldn't pay them. But now we have a team of people, and we need to make sure that we're all on the same sheet of music. So we come up before we even purchase a property with a property plan that includes capital improvements, marketing, rent increases, staffing. We come up with all these plans even before we purchase the property so that we're all on the same page going forward. So not having that, and once again, closing our property on day one and say, okay, great. And then the other leasing agents are saying, well, you didn't keep me on board, so we're leaving. And now there's nobody at the property. That seems pretty silly. But that's what planning is. It's, okay, what are we going to do how are we going to transition when the day comes to take over the accounts? How are we going to make sure the tenants know to pay us? This is all on our checklist that we write up, but it's very, very important to, those small details really matter when the first rolls around and you have, $80,000, $100,000 worth of checks and rent coming in, and you have no way to process it. So having those kinds of plans are very important. And then also you have the macro level plans, which is where you're going to take your business and your firm in the future. And, you're allowed to change that going forward, but you really need to make sure to focus on what your plan is.
All right, finally, I want to ask you, really, you've been through a lot, you've learned a lot, you've got some lessons that you've learned. We've all been there, done that. But I want to hear your advice on what you might give other investors, other syndicators, on how to be successful for some of the lessons you've learned. What would that be?
Well, it's not to be afraid of some of the things that we discussed today, fire hose effect. Learn to go out there and read, to ask questions, to take people to lunch, to find out how to do things bigger and better than what you're doing them now. And then find people that are better than you, and then have them do your work for you. Unlike in high school, when you're supposed to do your own work, I have other people do my own work for me all the time, from the website to editing to cover design, leasing agents. I mean, those are the kind of people that you really need to go out and find. They're smarter than you, understand what it is that they're doing, and then let them pay them to do it for you. The second is, I'd probably say focus and don't be a deal guy. Something you talk a lot about, Craig, is don't go chasing rabbits. Deal guys are guys that I've found that say, I'll buy anything that makes money. Or they have a smattering of their portfolio, just a smattering of real estate, from storage units to mobile homes to condos. I always think those guys are deal guys, and I'm not saying that you can't do that, but I would really say you want to be known in that one niche, in that one person, in that people go to. So, for example, for me, when they talk about properties, it's going to be, oh, Seth, I know exactly what he's looking for. He's looking for 80 units or larger that he can double the equity on in 2 years, outside of that, 4 years on the outside. In these kinds of neighborhoods, the tenants need to make between $35,000 and $75,000 a year household income. So, oh yeah, he knows that. That's him. I'm going to take this deal to him first because I know this is right up his alley. So have that focus. Be the best in that one little field you can be. And then if you want to expand into other fields later, absolutely do that. But I don't think you're ever going to be able to expand very well if you're not laser focused. So that's really going to chasing rabbits. And then I would say finally, and the biggest one, is to take action and not feel afraid to look stupid, to ask dumb questions, because everybody was there before. And if the person tells you it's a stupid question or makes you feel less than or belittles you anyway, those aren't the people you want to work with anyway. So just, cut them loose and move on, because I found that the people that I look up to are the ones that have been there, they've done that, they've been in my shoes, and they understand some of the pain that I've been feeling as I grow up in the industry and as a career. You won't know everything you're doing when you start your first deal, and even when it's over, you may not know everything, but you'll be very prepared for the next one. And if you follow some of the advice, or follow the advice that Craig gives you, read some of the stuff in my book and kind of internalize that, you're just going to be tough. You're going to be stopless. And the best part is Craig, when I follow your teachings, I make money either way. So even if I don't do everything 100% perfect, I'm still going to come out way ahead of where I was, say, this time last year. And really, so at that point, what's there to lose?
Well said, man. I appreciate the compliments. Thank you so much. And I got chills when you started talking about focus, because that's really the big bullet point I try to get across to everybody is to get focused on something, and you have, and you've been doing it, and you've been successful. You're the guy in your marketplace, in your industry, and you've had a lot of success. You wrote this book, and I was wondering if it's helped you with your syndication business, or has it helped you in any way?
Well, I only wrote the book only came out a couple months ago, and it became a bestseller on Amazon. But yeah, absolutely, it's helped me, because I think one of the things that, like I said, you kind of encouraged me to a few years ago is, wow, Seth, living in fifth wheel, that's such a great story. I'd love to hear more about that. And I would go to meetings with people and introduce myself to bankers and investors and everybody else in the industry, and I'd tell them these stories like, wow, what a great story. And I didn't really think much of it at the time. And now I tell them maybe one story, and we talk business and talk numbers and see how we can work together. And then I give them the book. It's a giveaway. So you can also buy it on Amazon, or if you want to go to lunch, I'll give you one for free. But also you can get a PDF copy for free if you go to the website, and I'd be happy to give that information as well.
That's great. And I think that there's no better business card than the book you wrote. You can't give somebody a resume, you did all this stuff, but if you give them a book on how to do this stuff, you just got it done, but it's really going to help advance your career in this business and continue to grow. And I'm so proud of you as a person. You're a good person. You're a solid guy, and you've done very, very well. So why don't you tell us the name of the book again?
It's Real Estate Flight Plan, and they can get the PDF copy for free at my website, sierrawhiskeyproperties.com. It's just a little opt-in, and you get emailed the PDF copy. You can get if you're more of a paperback or Kindle person, you can get that on Amazon. And while giving the book away is very good, I don't think a lot of people read the whole thing, to be quite honest. But what they do read is my pitch book. Yep. That's my business plan, and that is the biggest impactor above and beyond any other conversation we may have, is the pitch book. This is what I'm looking for. This is how I do it, and this is the experience that I've had in the past doing it, and that blows some doors off, having that with me.
I hope you enjoyed this interview. For more information on Seth Wilson, please visit his website at www.sierrawhiskeyproperties.com. And I highly recommend you get a copy of this book, because it will positively influence your syndication business. All you got to do is log into a website and plug in your information to get a copy right now. It's going to be a PDF digital copy, but you can get one right now. But if you want a hard copy, all you got to do is order one from Amazon. So I'd like to thank you for taking your time to listen to this interview. For any of the questions you might have, or comments or ideas, please email me at craig@valuehoundacademy.com.